Hello, I'm Pastor Paul. Welcome to the Lord of Life Lutheran Church Sermon Podcast. We're glad you're here. We know that you can't always be in worship with us, so we're glad to provide the sermons from our weekly services. We hope that you will find hope and inspiration as we have in Jesus Christ. And now, here's this week's message. The Holy Gospel according to Mark, the 12th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
As Jesus taught, he said, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." He sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. I'm always just a little leery of preaching after I read this text, because I stand up here in a long robe. What's broken? What's broken? What's broken in your life? Can you think of something? What's broken in our community, our country, our world? It's easy to think of things that are broken, isn't it? The other day a friend said she was going to take a sabbatical from watching the news because there was so much brokenness. That same friend said she was going to take a sabbatical from Facebook because, oh boy, is there a lot of brokenness on there. Right? There are broken things all around us. Some folks cleaned out the nursery a few weeks ago here at church and disposed of broken things. I marvel at the broken things that I keep around on my workbench or on my desk or in a drawer somewhere, because you just never know if that broken piece you had might fix something later on. Right? Anybody else? I'm the only one? Oh, good. Okay. I've visited with older relatives who have mason jars full of parts of things, just in case they're the one, right? Today's reading from Mark, I believe, is talking about broken things too. It comes on the heels of Jesus' big debate with the religious leaders in Jerusalem. He has been answering their questions and challenging them to a new understanding of their relationship with God and the interpretation of the law. And just before today's reading, Jesus has responded to the question of one of the scribes regarding which commandment is the most important. And Jesus says, "Love God and love your neighbor as yourself." Sound familiar? Just after today's reading, Jesus foretells the destruction of the temple. A massive structure with massive stones stacked on stones. And Jesus foretells its destruction and says not one stone will be left on the other. For today's reading, I imagine that Jesus is sitting off in the shade somewhere, and he's got his disciples around him and maybe a few other people who are listening for the words that he might say. He's talking about broken things that he sees in the life of the temple and its leaders. Broken things, like a system that exploits the poor for its own sake instead of helping the poor, especially the widows who have no voice or power in that community. The widow who gave her last coins, something Jesus points out. On the one hand, her faithfulness has compelled her to give everything she had, and yet, on the other hand, maybe she's the one who should be on the receiving end of that offering. In fact, at least one source I read this week suggested that some religious leaders, out of the goodness of their hearts, would volunteer to manage a widow's affairs and then exploit them for all that they had. That doesn't happen today, does it? You can still find examples of these kinds of temple leaders in the news these days. Maybe you saw one recently where there was a pastor who said that in order to do his ministry, he had to have a multi-million-dollar jet. And there are gullible people out there more than willing to give the money to do it. Broken. Sad and broken. And this isn't the first reference to a broken system in Mark's Gospel. In Mark 11:17, Jesus says, "The temple is no longer a house of prayer, but a den of robbers." Wow. Broken. It may be that the leaders in the temple didn't know any better. Maybe that's just the way that things have always been. They didn't realize that they were a part of a broken system, but Jesus does not give them an out. No excuses for ignorance. Instead, Jesus points out the need for reformation in the temple. A reformation of the systems that have taken advantage of the very ones God has entrusted to their care. Instead of protecting and caring for the widows and the poor and the vulnerable, the religious leaders have become focused on themselves. Now it makes sense that right before this text, we hear Jesus talking about loving God and loving our neighbor as ourselves. 2 Sundays ago, we celebrated Reformation Sunday, a day when we remember that monk named Martin Luther, who nailed his ideas about how to fix a broken church to a church door, and the church showed just how broken it was by its response when it said, "Recant, take it all back." But Martin Luther didn't do it. Instead, he persisted, and out of love for the church sprang a new church, even though he wanted to fix what was broken in the existing one. I think it's important to call into question the things that are broken around us. The church has gone on to practice some wildly broken stuff over the generations. The Crusades of the 11th century come to mind. And yes, the abuse of children by priests and clergy that have surfaced in recent years. Broken. We are broken too. By all rights, we belong in that pile with those old nursery toys that were discarded, left to collect dust somewhere. Yep, I hate to admit it, I'm broken and I cannot fix myself. But guess what? Only Jesus can do that. You, beautiful people, are broken. And you cannot fix yourselves. Only Jesus can do that. Only Jesus can do that. It is our brokenness that brings us to the foot of the cross. It is from the cross that Jesus cries out, as one broken by the sin of this world, "Father, forgive them." But we don't stop with our brokenness or even with the act of the cross and being forgiven. Out of our brokenness and forgiveness, we are called to name the broken things in our world and to call out those who abuse the poor and the vulnerable or take advantage of widows and orphans. We are called to see the broken things around us and ask God to help to guide us to make them right and to bring hope into these places. We have seen something that is broken in our community, and we have named it hunger. Each month on the 4th Sunday, we receive a loose change offering for ELCA World Hunger, but there are more hungry people in our community, and we are naming that. There are people who aren't sure where their next meal will come from in our community, and statistically that may be true for some people who are in this church. We are called to name the brokenness we see and to act to bring hope. And we are saying that we are bringing hope by partnering with St. Stephen's Food Bank to offer a mobile food pantry here at Lord of Life on Saturday. We're naming the brokenness and we're bringing hope, but we can only do it together. It takes all of us. All of us can do something. We need your help to make it happen. And there's a clipboard right out there. A place where you can say, I name the brokenness I see and I want to bring hope. And we need 20, 30 people for the early shift. And we need probably 20 people for the second shift. And we need probably 20 people for the final shift. And you can sit down at a chair and greet our clients, guests. Or you can help unload a truck. Or you can stand at a table with a smile and help people as they come by. We can all spare a couple of hours to heal what is broken, can't we? Yesterday we held a funeral for Janelle Geisert. We named the brokenness of death and we claimed the victory of the resurrection. As we think about what it means to care for our congregation, for our community, and for our world, we'll be looking for broken things and ways to be God's hands and feet in response. The love we give in return is our way of saying thanks to God for first giving us our hope, our salvation, and resurrection. Amen.
Thanks for listening to the Lord of Life Lutheran Church Sermon Podcast. If you're ever in the Dubuque-land area, please join us for worship. Visit our website at www.lordoflife.online to learn more about service times and about our vision for serving God and our community. God bless you.